Hi there, and welcome to the US Web Design System monthly call for September 2020. My name is Dan Williams, and I'm the USWDS product lead. Thanks for being here. We've got a number of things to show you today, but first I'd like to mention that we're recording this monthly call, and as always, we post these recordings to YouTube. So there's pretty much zero chance that your video would appear on YouTube. But if you don't want any of your video to be seen by anybody at any time, turn off your camera. We'll be posting links and references into the chat as we go along, and you're encouraged to ask questions in the chat at any time. If any member of our team can answer your question in the chat, we'll do so. Otherwise, there'll be some time for question and answer at the end of the hour. Also, be sure to introduce yourself in the chat as well. It's nice to know who's here. So your name, maybe where you're coming from. And with that, let's get started. It's been a hectic, busy month, and today we'll take a look at what we've done and what we've got coming up. So to start things off, we've got a number of new site launches. And then we'll dig into USWDS 2.9.0 features, bug fixes, and new components. We're also introducing a couple new items on our website that might prove useful, so introduce them as well. And lastly, I'll talk a bit about what's coming up for the next couple months of design system work. We've got a few changes to introduce, nothing startling, but some good necessary changes that will affect how you build with a design system. And at the end, we should have some time for a little discussion and Q&A. So without any further ado, let's jump right into site launches. This month, we've got a lucky 7 new USWDS powered sites to introduce. First up, de-risking-guide.18f.gov. This is 18F's de-risking guide, and this is, it's a deeply informative and non-technical introduction to modern software design principles and best practices from our friends at 18F. I found this to be an engaging and really enlightening look at how complicated projects can get done in state and federal government. So check it out. And the Office of Justice Programs just keeps rolling along with 4 new sites to introduce this month. First, juvenile-council.ojp.gov, the Coordinating Council on Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And ovc.ojp.gov, the Office for Victims of Crime. crimesolutions.ojp.gov, the National Institute of Justice's Crime Solutions. And smart.ojp.gov, the Office of Sex Offender Sentencing, Monitoring, Apprehending, Registering, and Tracking. And from DHS, we have studyinthestates.dhs.gov, the Study in the States program. And CFO.gov, the United States Chief Financial Officers Council. It's been a busy time and great work, everyone. It's nice to see so much good work out there. And let's get right to product updates. There it is. So next Monday, we will release USWDS 2.9.0. I do like to get the releases out before these monthly calls, but it was not to be this time, though Monday is not too long to wait, and it'll be worth it. There are a couple of nice improvements, nice small improvements, nice, even medium improvements in this release, including the first new utilities we've released in some time. Align Self. This adds Flexbox's Align Self property into the design system as Flex Align Self utilities. Align Self is similar conceptually to Flex Align, except at the Flex child level instead of the Flex parent level, applying only to specific children of a Flex parent. So for instance, In a flex parent in a row orientation, the flex align self utilities would have an output like we see here, with flex align self start at the top or start of the column's cross axis, flex align self middle in the middle, flex align self end down there at the bottom or the end of the column's cross axis, and flex align self stretch, stretching across the full height of the row. Or did I say column? I said column in all of these. This is a row of the rows cross axis and the rows cross axis for all of these. So anyhow, it's clear-ish. For me, this work, this flex align self utility work is especially gratifying since it came in as a pull request from the community, from a first-time contributor. And I'm really pleased to be able to include work like this in the design system. So right on. And this release addresses a longtime blind spot in our buttons, the lack of a native accent warm button variant. Well, you don't have to hack it together anymore. You can now make your warm accents actionable with an accent warm button. And USWDS 2.9.0 is the first release we'll launch with a SHA-256 hash generated and documented with the zip download. So anyone can check the integrity of the zip file by generating a hash for their local file and comparing it to the hash we post in the GitHub repo and on our site. So that will be a nice improvement as well. Release 2.9 also squashes a number of bugs. With community support, we fixed a problem with disabled radio button styling. We also fixed the active state of the secondary color button. We improved alignment of lists inside alerts. And now we're giving the proper unobtrusive styling to input group legends as well. We hope to make the design system better with every release, and every bug fix matters. Keep sending bug reports in, submitting bug fix pull requests, and discussing what you find in the public Slack. As the poet Mary Oliver said, like, attention is the beginning of devotion. So thank you. We're also releasing 3 new components in USWDS 2.9.0, and we'll take some time to look at them today. This new release includes Identifier. This is a new bottom of the page complement to the USWDS banner, and this is something you may have previously heard discussed as the anchor. So the anchor is now the identifier. And we're also introducing a step indicator, step indicators for updating users on their progress through a multi-step process. And rolling out Time Picker. Time Picker is a simple way to select a time. So we'll start with the identifier. The identifier clearly communicates the site's parent agency and displays all the links required by federal laws and policies. And to introduce the identifier, I'd like to ask my colleagues, Allie Shaw and James Meija, or contractors on the USWDS core team. Allie and James, take it away.
Thanks, Dan. So I'll wait for James to go ahead and share the identifier. So though there are required links that need to be displayed by federal laws and policies, it's not always clear what they are and how and where they should be displayed. These links are often not in a consistent location on federal sites, or sometimes not there at all. There's a reason that one of the most popular pages on digital.gov is its required web content and links page. These required links often link out to a website's parent agency or department, so including required links implies a sometimes unstated connection between a site and its parent. We created the identifier to provide a common way both to identify a site as an official website of a parent agency and easily present agency links required by federal policy. In the identifier, the links are presented in a logical, easy to recognize location underneath the site footer as a bottom of the page complement to the USWDS security banner. To update the required links section of the identifier, you'll need to update all the URLs and one bit of link text. For the About link, you'll need to update the link text to indicate the short name of the parent agency. For instance, About GSA for the General Services Administration. The rest of the links should be updated to the URL of that page most applicable and related to your site. In our guidance, we've linked out to the required links guidance on digital.gov for more context. In most cases, the required links link out to pages on your parent agency's principal website. For the accessibility link, use the accessibility page of your parent agency's principal website. For the FOIA request link, use a page on your parent agency's principal website that describes how the public can request information under the Freedom of Information Act. For the No Fear Act data link, use the Equal Employment Opportunity data posted pursuant to the No Fear Act page on your parent agency's principal website. For the Office of the Inspector General link, the URL should go to your parent agency's Office of the Inspector General. For the Performance Reports link, use a budget and performance page that includes the agency's strategic plan, among other financial and performance documentation. And finally, for the Privacy Policy link, use the privacy page most specific to your website. For example, if both your product and your parent agency have privacy pages, link to the products page here. One more thing to note. If you have a Spanish language site, use the Spanish version of the identifier available on the identifier page on Design System digital.gov. Thank you to the team at USWDS for providing the text for the Spanish version. Be sure to update any required links to Spanish language URLs if such pages exist. And now James will dive into the details of the identifier.
Thank you, Allie. So identifier is made up of 3 sections. The first section, what we call the masthead, contains the site domain and a statement about the site's parent agency. The second contains the required links. And the last section is a required link to additional information on USA.gov. So let's take a look at the configuration of the identifier. You should add your parent agency or department logo in the masthead. We recommend using an SVG with an ARIA roll-up image to provide the best quality for all screen sizes. Note that the identifier isn't the place for your own logo. Use your site footer for site-related logos and content. You can also add multiple logos if your site has multiple parents. If you are the parent organization or your organization doesn't have a logo, then just omit the logo. Some sites must state that they were created at taxpayer expense. So if your site was created at taxpayer expense, you might want to reach out to your agency's general counsel office to determine if this requirement applies to your site. If it does apply to your site, you can include it after the standard identifier masthead text. The second section has the required links as defined by digital.gov that Allie mentioned earlier. The only link text you need to update is the About page for your agency or whichever is the highest in the hierarchy of your organization. For example, on the Design System website, we link to About GSA. And lastly, the USA.gov section should remain unchanged on every site. That's it for identifier. Back to you, Dan.
All right, thanks, Allie and James. I'll get my screen back up and see if I can't get some slides back up too. There we go. All right, so yeah, thanks again. You'll be able to find the identifier guidance and code at designsystem.digital.gov/components/identifier. So when might you use the identifier? To identify a site's parent agency. The identifier is a complement to the USWDS banner. You use the identifier to tell users what agency is responsible for your site. Include agency identifier, include agency information like that in the identifier, not in the banner. So the identifier is the place to say something like an official website of of the General Services Administration, whereas in the banner, we talk about an official website of the US government. We would also use the identifier to display links that are required by federal laws and policies. As Allie and James mentioned, the identifier includes the links that are required on all government sites. So if you want to check the boxes around what links to include on site, include the identifier, and as long as you link up all the things down there, you should be all set. When should you consider using something else? Anytime it would be misleading. Sort of like the banner, the identifier should be used to reduce confusion. Avoid using the identifier on a site that's just like meant for testing or otherwise not meant to be identified as an official government website. And you'd also want to consider making changes if there's a lot of redundant content. So don't add the identifier without removing any duplicate links from your existing site footer if they already exist. Favor the common links and content in the identifier over equivalent content in the site footer. Keep the footer site specific. Let the identifier carry the weight of agency identification and federal requirements. So that's the identifier. Next up is step indicator. A step indicator updates users on their progress through a multi-step process. And I'll be showing step indicator with a little demo site I built using USWDS Sandbox, which is another one of our GitHub repos. If you ever want to throw together a quick prototype and something like CodePen can't get it done with your USWDS SAS or settings, then maybe give USWDS Sandbox a whirl. Let me see if I can jump over to my other window here and open up Sandbox. All right. So here you'll see an example of the new step indicator. So step indicator is sort of up here at the top and includes this header right here. And step indicator is used to indicate where a user is in the process. And we want to use a number of methods to help call out the current step. We want to use color, we want to use formatting, we want to use lightness, we want to use boldface. We want to use a number of things to indicate that the highlighted step is the current step. We also match the color between the progress bar and the heading underneath it. And that said, we also want to place a heading directly below the step indicator. Each step kind of needs an explicit heading. The step indicator segments here, even with labels, are not sufficient as a heading for a page or a screen. So we include a heading below that reiterates the step that the user is in. And we also want to try to use short or single word labels as much as possible. If you're labeling these step indicators, try to use short words as much as you can. If you want to be succinct and you want to get the idea covered sort of at a glance. That said, the step indicator can accommodate longer text, but you can sometimes get yourself into a situation like this, and I'll switch over to my code view for a second, where let's just say you had a number of steps. Which can also work. This will work fine, but you may get yourself in a situation where at a smaller width, as you close this up, it runs out of space to fully collapse. And so if you do get yourself in the sort of situation where there are a lot of steps and you can't really cut down the text that much, we give a variant for the step indicator that just can omit the labels altogether. And the step indicator is still effective even if it's not showing the labels. We have a variant called no labels. And I always spell labels wrong. If we come back here, this is just a relatively simple progress bar with no labels, which is a very easy way to accommodate as many steps as necessary in your process. And yeah, so there are a few ways to use step indicator beyond no labels. You can also choose, in addition to labels, to show what we're calling counters. And counters are these little numbers that count up the number of steps in the process. Here it goes all the way up to 7. We're just going to go through and hide these last 2 sort of demo steps and come back here. So the step indicator can also show counters. It can show labels, it can show no labels, it can show counters, and it can also show small counters. So there are a number of ways to set up the stepper so that it is showing just what you need to show in your form or your process. Now there's a number of sort of accessibility considerations built into the step indicator. You'll want to, of course, use the proper heading level for the header, wherever that header is now. There we are. In this case, it happens to be an H2, but it should be whatever works for your page. You should use the right ARIA label for the stepper as well. So we recommend using an ARIA label of progress for this indicator. And you put that right up in the step indicator parent here. You also want to try to use visually hidden text on labels to help give a little bit more clarity to the label with screen readers. So you can add a USASR only that is clear that each step is either completed or not completed. Personal information is completed. Finalize is not completed. And we indicate the current step with ARIA current. And that is the accessibility of the step indicator. So one thing I think that's important to mention about the step indicator is that the step indicator is meant to be used for linear content, linear processes. So it's not meant for something where you might be doing a lot of bouncing between different steps. This is for usually for things like forms where things happen in a certain kind of order. And because it's made for this linear functionality, we don't support putting links to the steps in the step indicator itself. We want to put the step indicator is not navigation. We want to use standard sort of form navigation for form to kind of continue forward to the next step or to go back. Of course, now they look a little bit different because I've changed the formatting over here. But if let's go make them the same so that let's not worry about it. Anyhow, there are a lot of things that you can do with the step indicator to make it work with your site. In addition to the variants that I showed with counters, small counters, and no labels, you can also center it if you want with counters and center. And you have a centered counter up here as well. And we get into it in some of our implementation guidance, but we talk about, especially with the centered step indicator, how these gaps can be kind of distracting, and a centered indicator often doesn't play as well with a thick indicator bar. And that's why we also kind of have some ways to affect the display of the step indicator. You can change the size of the segment gap. Bring this back down to 2px. We could make a 2px segment height. And we could also make a 2px counter gap as well. So as this goes through and does its thing, you can come back and see this with a slightly more acceptable centered step indicator. Of course, if you're using a centered step indicator, you'd probably also be using it with centered content underneath, which you can also do with something like USWDS utilities. If you want to do it with utilities, you could add flex justify center down here. And then everything is, you center everything else as well, and it can work with a center-oriented page as well. So there's a lot that the step indicator can do. There's a lot of ways that it can fit into some existing styles, and a lot of ways to theme the step indicator to make it work for your multi-step process. And that is step indicator. And come back over here and go back to what we do is step indicator. So you'll be able to find the step indicator guidance in code at designsystem.digital.gov/components step indicator. When might you use a step indicator? You'd use it for multiple steps and screens. Use the step indicator when users working through a form or process that will span several different pages that can be organized into 3 or more high-level steps or chapters. This helps users understand the progression of long forms and reduces uncertainty as they complete each section, each screen. Boy, talking. And you also want to use it for things that have linear progression. So the step indicator is designed to complement standard back-next navigation in a linear sequence and not to be navigation of its own. It's not really appropriate for like non-linear forms or interactions that might be completed in any order, as I've mentioned before. And when would you consider something else? If you have sort of a long form with conditional logic, you might want to consider another approach if the number of steps might change due to user input. And for very short forms, don't use a step indicator for short forms without real like chapters or sections. If a form or process has like fewer than 3 sections, don't use a step indicator. You'd use a step indicator for a 2-step process. And sort of to follow on before, like it's not really appropriate for like non-linear interactions. And that is step indicator. And finally, time picker. Time picker helps users select a specific time. And I'll be returning to that demo site to show the time picker in more detail. So let's head over to our friend the sandbox again. And we can see that I have included one of the new time pickers down here in this very, very useful form. So the time picker is essentially a progressive enhancement on a basic USA input. Conceptually, it's very much like a specialized combo box instance, and not just conceptually, sort of functionally as well. It's a specialized combo box instance, and it also supports combo box initialization properties. So most of the things that you can do with combo box, you can also do with time picker. So time picker sort of works like this, and inside you have a list of times that you can control with data properties. Right now, I've set it to go from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., but but you can make all kinds of adjustments to the time picker to change the content of the time picker. If I come back over here down to the time picker, you can see sort of right here is the time picker, and the time picker is really just a wrapper, USA time picker, around an input that you use for time. And the configuration options for time picker are these data properties here: data step, data min time, and data max time. The data step is the number of minutes between each step in the picker. The min time is the earliest time to list in the time picker in 24-hour format. And the max time is the maximum time to display in the picker in 24-hour format. By default, you can go back and check this out. By default, it goes from midnight to midnight in 30-minute increments. But all of those things, as shown, are configurable in the properties. So there's a data placeholder. It does accept some of the things from Combo Box as well, like a data placeholder element, which we can do, but we, I guess, recommend that you don't do. And it can also include default values, just as with Combo Box. And that's the time picker. You know, there's not too much further to show with the time picker. It works sort of as expected with the Combo Box. So if you do 2 p.m., it'll jump to 2 p.m. It won't filter like a Combo Box. It won't not show all of the other things. It just drops you in at 2 p.m. So you can then select things around the date that you type in. But jump around like that. So the time picker can be a good complement to the date picker, and you can use those two elements together to begin to build more complex forms. So yeah, you'll be able to find the time picker guidance in code at designsystem.digital.gov/components/form controls with the rest of the advanced form components. So when might you use time picker? Use it for scheduling. Use the time picker to schedule a time from common consistent increments, such as planning a meeting time in 30-minute blocks. And really, for the most part, for times in the future. The time picker is meant to choose blocks of time. You're not meant to add something that's in like 1-minute increments. You could, but that's not the intention of time picker. It's meant to be sort of approximate. So when should you use something else? When you really need to use an exact time. Plain text input is more appropriate for something like an exact time, a historical exact time, like time of birth or something like that. In general, a good rule of thumb is that time picker is good for times in the future and less good for historical times. And those are the new components in USWDS 2.9.0. Now, code is not all that's new in USWDS 2.9.0. We have a couple new and hopefully useful pages on our site that we'll also be releasing next week, driven by user feedback and the questions we've been answering in Slack and on email. So first, a USWDS fundamentals and quick start guide. We know there can be a real learning curve getting started with the design system. There's a wall of documentation, and it can be hard to know just like, what do I need to do to install USWDS into a project? The Fundamentals and Quick Start Guide is our first attempt to answer that question. It's It's probably by no means the end of the road for improving the documentation on how to use USWDS, but it's our way to begin to do some good quickly. This guide uses a step-by-step format to introduce two fundamental USWDS concepts: how to add USWDS source code to a project, and how to compile that source code into browser-readable CSS. It addresses settings, SAS, NPM, USWDS gulp, and more common questions, and it's intended for relatively tech-savvy newcomers to the design system. So that'll be launching with the rest of 2.9 next week. We're also publishing sample contract language for 21st Century IDEA. We worked with our team and TTS's Office of Acquisitions to build some boilerplate contract language that you can use to add 21st Century IDEA requirements to new or open solicitations, and to develop vendor evaluation factors that can help select the best vendor by evaluating their ability to develop modern websites that meet specific requirements of 21st Century IDEA, including incremental adoption of USWDS. So we look forward to releasing both of these new resources alongside USWDS 2.9.0. So what's next after this release? Well, going to be running another beta is the short answer there. This one is nowhere near the scope of the USWDS 2.0 beta, but we've identified a number of functional improvements that will improve the overall developer experience of the design system, sort of set the stage for future work. And these can use as much developer feedback as possible to make the transition as seamless as we can make it. And this includes launching a new component library sort of under the hood in the design system, integrating the SAS module system into our code base, moving to more simplified single file settings, and providing better guidelines for setting theme colors. So we'll be retiring our old component library and replacing it with something better maintained with an existing government user base, particularly in the Drupal community, Pattern Lab. That was the solution that worked best for our code and for our skill set right now. And that is sort of where we're going for our component library in the near future for the design system. If you're like most developers, you might have never noticed our existing library system. In a way, for most use cases with USWDS, when the library does its job, it's pretty much invisible to downstream developers. And when we migrate, we'd like to keep the library unobtrusive for now. But this, combined with other work in USWDS 2.10, will allow us to build a more modular design system with a simpler structure and better guidelines for component requirements for just what we need to do to build a component, what needs to be included in a USWDS component. We like to package all of these things together so that we can build them more easily, and we can describe to others how to build them more easily. So this is stuff we build for ourselves and for contribution guidelines for community-driven development. So on the subject of modularity and modular code, we'll be taking this opportunity to update our SAS code base. SAS is the style sheet language that powers the design style sheets, and no later than 1 year from next month, October 2021, they'll be deprecating some of the fundamental building blocks of that language in favor of their next generation of code. And so we want to be ahead of that transition and keep you ahead of it as well. But it's not just about staying one step ahead of deprecations. This new work will allow teams to really import just the design system code they need for their projects. As the design system grows, it'll be more and more important that using the design system isn't an all or nothing proposition. This new work will help the system grow without an adverse effect on performance or on your code footprint. So we want to build more stuff into the design system, but we also know that not every project needs everything. This work will allow every project to tailor the design system just to what they need to build what they need to build. We'll also be changing how we recommend that teams use USWDS settings. Today, we encourage teams to use settings files that include every setting available to the design system over a number of different settings files. Not only can this be cumbersome, but including all of these extraneous unused settings can have an adverse effect, especially if you're trying to keep your settings files up to date with the current system. It just creates a lot of overhead of things to keep up to date. It's a lot to keep track of. This could be simpler, and it will be. Now, we'll be improving our settings documentation on our website and moving to a single file that includes just the settings that you need, just the settings that are relevant to your project together in one place. This will make it easier to know just what settings apply to your project, and it'll be easier to keep those settings files up to date as the design system changes in the future. So we'll be simplifying settings. And lastly, we'll be developing a more rigorous guidelines for theme colors. Specifically, we're trying to get more specific about what system color grades like 20, 30, et cetera, are meant for what theme color grades like darker, darkest, dark, et cetera. We're doing this for a couple reasons, and the most important is that it has an effect on accessibility. We want to help teams deliver accessible color combinations, no matter what color families they use in their themes. And we want to do as much as we can to deliver components and code that looks the way you expect out of the box, no matter how you've themed your project. We think there's an opportunity to improve both accessibility and project-to-project continuity with a bit more rigor in our theme colors. So we're going to be working on better guidelines for theme colors. So all of that and more components will be coming as we work toward USWDS 2.10. Now, we expect that this will be about a 60-day beta, so a couple months. And we'll be getting the first beta release, including SAS modules work, out next week. Maybe a little bit early, and maybe a little bit rough around the edges, but we want to get some of this work out as soon as possible so that you can look at it, so that you can try it, you can find where it's working and where it can be improved. We're going to be releasing the first beta next week with additional releases, probably timed for about each sprint. We'll post, that's every 2 weeks. We'll post more information in the public Slack and on GitHub next week, so stay tuned for all of this upcoming work around USWDS 2.10. So that is the month. And with that, I'll open the floor to some Q&A. And to do that, I will try to open up my chat. Where's the old chat? More, there it is, chat. Okay. So let me scroll back up, see if I can find some of these questions. Let's see. Kathy Flanagan asks, is it possible to add additional links to the identifier? For example, at DOJ, we require a link to legal policies and disclaimers. Right now, as much as possible, we're trying to encourage just those links in the identifier that are required by all websites for the most part. So I think we're maybe potentially open to opening that up, but I think what we really intend to do with the identifier is to make this section as consistent as possible across sites. So if there is additional required content for a particular department or agency, right now we would probably suggest that go into the site, into your site footer, and not into the identifier. Heather Choi is asking, will the step indicator work well with mobile layout? Heather Choi, thank you for pointing out what I was so deeply remiss in showing in my demo, which is that Yes. So the step indicator is built to work with mobile layout. What the step indicator does at narrow widths is pretty much to go into no labels mode. So the step indicator can show labels or counters or sort of whatever at wider widths, but once you get down into mobile, it's just going to go into no labels mode, and that's really where the additional step indication in the step indicator heading comes into play. It'll use color in the indicator bar and the step indication in the step indicator heading to make it work as well as possible at mobile widths. Will there be vertical versions? Steve Walker asks, will there be a vertical version of the step indicator? Right now, there's no plan for a vertical version of it. We did look at some tests of vertical versions with the step indicator, but we didn't find something that justified the real estate that it was consuming. We really wanted to try with the step indicator to be as low footprint and as focused as it could be, and so we went with the horizontal position. But with all things, like I think maybe there's a case to be made. Maybe there's a case. Haha, lol at my child. Yes, I see that there. Yeah, he's got opinions. Callum asks, this is great. Does USWDS have any standards or best practices for how input should be visualized from an admin view? Let's see, i.e. reviewing times submitted by users. No, I think, and this is where I might be getting into where I'm not entirely sure. I think that when the data is sort of collected from this, the data comes in, I think, as just sort of plain text, and it's not like converted into a special time format. So if you're looking at time submitted, I think what you'll find is just plain text input. Perhaps there's something more that we could or should do to provide an option for different kinds of outputs, but that's something that right now we're sort of hunting to further development. Kadeem asks, are there any future plans for USWDS icons? Yes, yes, but we're getting there. So, but to maybe elaborate a little more fully, we are going to be doing some more work on improving our support for icons. So that doesn't necessarily mean that USWDS will be making its own icon set, but we do, on our roadmap, is improving our icon support. Wade Burlback asks, goodbye Fractal. Just curious, was Storybook considered? It was considered. Yes, that was definitely one of the big library options that we considered. But it was proving to be too much of a leap for us, and that it had a lot of power, but a lot of overhead that was beyond what we needed to do right now. And we knew that we needed to update the library in the near term. And we knew we had a lot of existing clear use cases for Pattern Lab. But Storybook was a powerful contender. Wade is also asking about web components. At USCIS, we've been slowly building up a USWDS React component library. Excellent. Trying to keep it compliant by testing against our unit tests, which is awesome. We are thinking about web components. There's a lot of considerations when it comes to web components and just how we expect our design system to require JavaScript and the connection between web components and style sheets, and the potential connection between web components and CSS variables. Like, there's a lot of moving parts for it that we have to that we're only beginning to address. So I think there's a lot of promise in that world, certainly with web components as there is with something like React, but we're only sort of dipping into that slowly. Nicole asks, I'm from the state of Maryland. When you say not to use the time picker for exact times, what exactly do you mean by that? And I mean that the time picker is meant to show times, incrementalized time. So time that's shown in increments of something, 10, 15, 30 minutes, an hour, or 2 hours. It's meant for choosing things at a certain level of granularity that is greater than the individual minute. So if you have to do something for 1:23 p.m. And you need that kind of granularity, you're talking potentially about a time picker that might have a lot of options, and that's probably better suited to just plain text input. Melissa asks, a mobile step indicator. Sorry. Yes, I don't know why I neglected showing that. Ridiculous. Did I consider adding next previous for step indicator? Asked Saeed. Yes and no. So what we recommend is using next previous buttons, but to use them really in the context of the form interaction and not to put next and previous up into the step indicator. Why do you not recommend using step indicators for nonlinear wizards? I think right now we're really just trying to keep it focused, and the research and work we did was around linear content, so we're really focusing just on trying to make it the best solution for linear. There's more considerations, I think, when we're dealing with nonlinear, and I think we weren't ready to open up all of those considerations right now. So we're trying to keep step indicator scope to linear, though I think we're open to figuring out like how we might go from here to better support nonlinear. So Sawyer is asking, is there supporting user research that you could share that went into the decision of adding the step indicator pattern? So the user research that we collected from that, we might be able to share some of it. It was largely collected from things that we got both from VA and from IRS, and then we sort of did a synthesis of those things and mostly tried to follow the more simple and streamlined approach that they followed at VA. And I think that's which version of Pattern Lab? I don't know. If Chaz is in the chat, he can say what version is. Yeah, thanks, Chaz. Latest version. If I skipped anyone's, in step indicator, can we disable one step in between based on previous step answers? No, no, and that's kind of why for now, we are trying to disencourage the step indicator for forms that might have complex logic. So that's something where the number of steps might change, or the requirement of certain steps might change. Right now, the step indicator, I think, just doesn't have the, I don't think it can convey enough context, or can work well enough with a complex logic pattern to not potentially be confusing. Similarly with optional segments, like that said, like this is the first iteration of step indicator, and I think while we were trying to stay very scoped on the kinds of use cases we are promoting for step indicator, I think as folks like you sort of maybe broaden the scope of what we might do with step indicator, we can look into how we might change step indicator or build something on top of step indicator to support some of these more complex use cases. If I missed anybody's question, please send it again. Otherwise, we've got just a minute or so here. It looks like I actually timed it out pretty well today. Oh, forgot. There's still one more slide. How about that? So some wrap up. So thank you. Thank you for joining today's call. There's a lot going on, and I appreciate everyone paying attention and being engaged through the whole thing. In October, if all goes well, fingers crossed, we should have a super spooky monthly call on dark patterns. Hope we can do that. If not, it'll happen at some point. It doesn't have to be spooky. And as always, I encourage you to join the community in the USWDS public Slack channel, so you can follow our progress and get answers and contribute there. And see you next month. Big month. October should be big as well. So thank you all for joining, and we'll see you in about 4 weeks. Thanks so much.